Hello and welcome to Dice and Demons. I'm Emma, and in this video I am going to ask the question that I think all of us who are into both Warhammer Age of Sigmar and 40k are asking ourselves. Why can't you play the Seraphon in 40k? Okay, perhaps that's not a question everyone is asking, but it's a question that came up in my mind just recently when I was painting some of my Seraphon. I was painting the new Slan model, which is cool, by the way, very time consuming, but that's a discussion for another time. And I was also reading through the new book and looking at what I could do, because I'm going to play a game with the new Seraphon pretty soon, and I'm looking forward to that. So I was just flicking through the book, and then it struck me that a lot of the things that are going on with the Seraphon would actually sort of make them suitable, in my mind at least, for 40k. And so I am kind of wondering, why can't you play them in 40k? And is this perhaps like an idea that they are at some point, hopefully, maybe, very unlikely, I'm just wishlisting here, actually going to be a playable faction in 40k? So my reasons for thinking this or hoping this is that I think there's been quite a big change in what's going on with the Seraphon, because when we started out with the whole faction back in the olden days, way before I was part of the hobby even, I have some very old White Dwarf magazines lying around, and I even have a copy of the one where they sort of launched the Lizardmen. And in that, the Lizardmen are described as sort of savage, relatively stupid brute beasts, and then they have the Slan, who have some sort of connection to the old ones, some sort of gods from space, but they have been left behind. They are not connected to those sort of star beings anymore, as far as I remember. So they're sort of just stranded in Lostria, the jungle world of Warhammer Fantasy, where they have to live out their lives, more or less just being a relatively standard species. They are just, reptiles, and then you have the amphibian frogs, who are quite a bit, wiser than the rest of them. And I think they have some illustrations of just from the slans here. You can see some of the older slan models, and then of course compared to the newer ones. And I think the old Slan model, which I actually quite adore, it's really fun, that doesn't look like it has anything to do with something sort of sci-fi at all. It's very grounded in science fiction, and it's also I think it's really fun, and it reminds me of sort of things you might see in Alice in Wonderland or something. So very grounded to me, at least in fantasy. And also the older Slan model. This is the one in Finecast. I have painted one of these at one time. That also just seems quite, well, I wouldn't say standard fantasy. That sounds really boring. It was actually a nice design. I hated it because it wasn't Finecast, but I didn't hate the design at all. But the newer ones, I think, are much more sort of sci-fi / fantasy-ish than the older ones. You can see here, of course, the Slan and the Lord Croak. And I think both the models themselves are like that, but also the way they are shown off by the Warhammer community team, where you can see sort of the celestial background. You can see the dark sky with some sort of stars, the Milky Way or whatever in the background. So I think the whole new thing is really tying the Seraphon very actively into the story that they are from space. And you can also see it in this drawing here, which also is in the new Seraphon book, which is of one of their, I believe it's called the temple ship, sort of like huge space vessels, where you have the spawning pools where the Seraphon sort of appear from. They aren't born. They're just spawned, fully grown and ready to fight, and they just fly around in these huge temple ships, and then they can sort of go in wherever they want to be in the mortal realms. And another thing with the Seraphon that I think would make them suitable for 40k is not just that they have, they have spaceships. Come on, how 40k can you get? You have spaceships, but also that the Seraphon are all about fighting chaos. Chaos is their greatest enemy, the big enemy. You also get you get some bonuses if you're playing Seraphon, if you go up against Chaos, or at least you used to do in the old book. I don't know if you do in the new one because I haven't gotten to the rules yet. But they are really really focused on fighting Chaos, and that would just make a lot of sense also in 40k, because you still have Chaos in 40k, of course, as a major adversary. So I think they would fit right in. Another thing I think, especially with the new Seraphon, is that some of the new designs also are a little bit more sci-fi than the older ones. The older ones are, well, they're sort of very based on Aztec art and Aztec glyphs and so on, which is really cool. I like that. But they haven't moved completely away from that. They still include that, but they are sort of mixing that with something that looks a little bit more alien or a little bit more sci-fi. So if you can see, for instance, here in the shield on this rider here, I think the look on the shield is still Aztec-ish, but I also think some of it looks just a little bit more sci-fi and a little bit more like it could also be relevant if you were, from outer space or something. Of course, most of the Seraphon, as you can see here, they have, what you might call, compared to a lot of the other 40k factions, they have perhaps a little bit more primitive weaponry. They are riding on dinosaurs after all. But on the other hand, I don't see why that should just automatically disqualify them from 40k, because you have races like the orcs, right? And the orcs are riding squigs. So if you can ride a squig and be successful in 40k, which I would say that the orcs are pretty successful, and why can't you ride, space dinos? I don't see why not at all. I think they would need just a little bit of tweaking to make sure that they would fit in with the 40k stuff. I don't think I would want to see the Seraphon with tanks or with bolt guns or something. I think they should be more focused on what is already in their lore, that they have sort of really ancient, profound, mystic technology that only they understand and only they are able to operate, and that a lot of the technology is fueled with magic. But that again ties them into like chaos demons, for instance. They don't have bolt guns and stuff. They have all sorts of other weapons, and they work just fine, and they can go up against the most technologically advanced factions you have in 40k without any problems, right? So I think the Seraphon should be able to do the same, and then you could just tweak them a little bit, perhaps have a little bit more visible technology. But I actually think a lot of it would work really well, just because if Seraphon was just believed to be a sort of, well, they are technologically advanced, but their technology just doesn't look like the other factions do. So you wouldn't expect them to have, as I said, tanks or like helicopters or whatever. And again, look at the shield here. I really think it looks. I think it looks like it has something to do with space. Like it has some sort of, I don't know, a stylized image of a constellation of the stars or something. Which I think it looks cool. And again, then you have big brutes like these, the Croxigors, and they are, of course, just. I don't think they're very sort of sci-fi, but again, you have also in something like the Imperial Guard, you have the Ogrins and stuff. So there's always room in 40k for just big melee beasts, basically, and I think that could work just fine with the reptilian good guys. I think the Seraphon are the good guys. I'm not quite sure everyone else would agree. Yeah. Also, I think some of the, I think this is the whole sci-fi space aspect of the Seraphon is most prevalent in the newer designs, like with the new Slan and with the design, for instance, as I said, on the shields, on some of the, especially on some of the Soros stuff. But also some of the older models I think would actually work really well. Like you have here the Soros Old Blood on Carnosaur. The Carnosaur, of course, being the big giant dino, and I would love to be able to bring a big T-Rex to a game of 40k. I'm just saying that would be cool. But look at the way. I mean, he has a spear. The rider has a spear, which again has some sort of a little bit like a space-ish star constellation design going on that I think could tie it in pretty well with a 40k setting. But also look at the hand that he's stretching out. So this is it's a ranged attack that he's got in his hand, and it shoots out some sort of magic beam. And I mean that could be just as relevant or just as fitting in 40k as it is in Age of Sigmar. I don't think like magic beams, they belong in both places. So I think this would be another model that could work really well. Perhaps some minor tweaks to make sure that it looked just a little bit more sci-fi than pure fantasy, but I don't think that it would be completely out of place at all. Another model I think would also be quite cool, perhaps again just some slight touches to tweak it, but would be the Bastillodon, which is sort of a big, heavy, very tough armored dino, which has this shooty crystal on top. And again, this is I completely forgot what it's a Bastillodon, and you can get it like with the you can get it with like the Ark of Sotek, which is where it has a lot of snakes. But you can also have it's called the Solar Engine. Yeah, I completely forgot what it was called. You have the Solar Engine here, which I think is the one that perhaps fits the idea I have of the Seraphon in 40k the best. Again, it works with magic. You have some sort of magic power that is collected into the crystal, and then it just shoots out and obliterates whatever it touches. And then you have the one here, as you can see, with the snakes coming out of it, which is more of as far as I remember, a melee attack. I've only ever used the solar beam one, so I can't really speak to the snake one, what it actually does. But I just think, I mean, it would look really cool. You have a bunch of little dudes, and then you have a big dino, and then you have a magic, laser attack, basically. I mean, that could work in 40k, couldn't it? I think it could. So, yeah. On the other hand, of course, we already have so many factions in 40k, so perhaps this is just not relevant at all, and not necessary, not needed, and nobody wants it. On the other hand, I mean, I know at least one person who wants it, which would be me. Just because I think, some of it just has to do with the fact that I actually think that a bunch of space traveling lizard folk who can do magic attacks, I can't really see why they wouldn't fit into 40k. And the other being that I just really like dinos, and I would love to be able to bring my dinos to games of 40k also. Again, I'm also a little bit more interested in things that look more like fantasy stuff than sci-fi stuff, if I have to be completely honest. And so every time I get a chance to bring something in 40k that has more of a fantasy vibe, I really enjoy that. Which then also, of course, might be a reason to say, well, if I really, really like it and I think it's a good idea, perhaps it does not fit well with the 40k setting at all. So that's open for a discussion at least. So let me know what you think. Seraphon, lizard people in 40k? Yay? Nay? Perhaps? Any suggestions as to how they would fit? How you could tweak the existing models, perhaps to make the range be just a little bit more sci-fi-ish? Also, are there any other fantasy stuff from Warhammer that you would love to see in 40k? I could also really see the Skaven. I mean, they already have crazy contraptions and weird machinery. I could definitely see them somehow, by mistake, landing themselves in the 40k universe and trying to blow, well, everything up, including themselves, more or less by accident. I would think that would be really fun as well. So, anyways, those are my immediate suggestions. So, let me know what you think. Any ideas? Any comments? Let me know down below. So last but certainly not least, I would love to thank my patrons who are supporting this channel. So thank you to Thomas Madsen, to Gwenna L, Andre Correa, Anthony Paul Castro, TJ Kubiak, Mando Project, Starcon85, Esbir, and Econococcus. If you would like to also support the channel as a patron, you can find a link to that in the show notes. Also remember that you can find me as Dyson Demons over on Twitter and Instagram if you would like to stay up to date on my painting projects. So thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye!